You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking to attorney Judy Rinot, who specializes in real estate and investment law. She's a 20-year veteran in the law business here, and we're very happy to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So my first question is like this. I know you work with people both in Israel as well as outside. Can someone outside of Israel actually purchase a property in Israel without flying to Israel?
Well, yes, Doug. A foreigner could purchase property in Israel. You do not need to be an Israeli citizen to purchase property in Israel, nor do you need to fly to Israel to do the actual transaction. I have many clients who purchase properties in Israel without even having seen the actual property before the purchase. What I would suggest to do is appoint an attorney in Israel to carry out the entire transaction for the purchaser. This is done by signing a document called Power of Attorney. The Power of Attorney document should contain all the necessary details regarding the purchased property and the parties, of course, and it has to be authorized properly, whether it be before an Israeli consul or via apostille method. But the most important point to remember is I recommend to appoint an attorney that specializes in real estate transaction, has experience with foreigners, and make sure that he is going through and protecting you to get the optimal terms and protect your interests.
Does the attorney also deal with tax issues? In other words, do foreigners have special tax issues that an Israeli wouldn't have?
No. A foreigner does not. There are certain perks for Olim Chadashim which are less relevant today. As a matter of fact, you can say that basically it would be almost the same for a foreigner to purchase a property in Israel as an Israeli, especially when dealing with residential properties.
Okay. Let's say that a foreigner wants to come to Israel to buy a property, and he wants to obtain a mortgage. So he's overseas, and I know the Israeli banks, especially now, are getting more nervous about mortgages. Is it feasible to get a mortgage from an Israeli bank or borrow money from a non-Israeli bank?
A foreigner can obtain a mortgage from an Israeli bank in Israel in the currency of his choice. He can take the mortgage in dollars, in euros, in shekels, whatever is convenient for him and based on his personal details and his salary and his assets, etc. Typically, a mortgage bank in Israel will grant between 50 to 60 of the sale price, and the mortgage bank will grant the mortgage only after the purchaser put down his own private capital. So a buyer would have to put down between 40 to 50% of the sale price before the mortgage bank will actually grant the mortgage. What's important to stress is that, of course, the mortgage bank will want to do a financial check on the purchaser. The banks in Israel do not rely solely on the property purchase as collateral, and they will check financial capability of the purchaser to return the mortgage, and this is different than in other countries. It's an important point to note. What I do suggest always is to obtain a principal approval in writing from the bank before going ahead with a deal. And in addition, and this is something I do for my clients, to shop around. Banks have different interest rates and terms, and it's very important to try to negotiate the best terms possible.
Is this what you do for your clients? Or
yes, definitely, definitely.
Okay, and when the principal agreement means that the client will know that the bank will actually put up the money as long as the deal goes through?
Correct. Of course, there are other additional checks that banks will do. They'll send an assessor to give an evaluation of the property, and they will conduct titleship searches, et cetera. But basically, a purchaser won't go into a deal if all those other issues aren't up to par. So the main point that it's important to check before signing any document regarding the purchase of the deal is that the bank accepts the purchaser and confirms that they agree that he has the financial capability and that they will give him the loan.
Mm-hmm. What sort of other information would they ask about him that the purchaser might consider private?
Well, they're going to ask for income tax statements and credit reports and past statements from bank accounts or past statements from mortgages that were taken, et cetera, et cetera. In addition, there's all kinds of application forms to fill out, but it's a process.
All right. We are speaking to attorney Judy Rinot, who specializes in real estate and inheritance law in Israel. You've got a lot of experience dealing with foreigners, and as people often come into Israel, they get surprises when they purchase anything, whether it's a falafel or a property. Can you tell us some of the surprises that your clients have found?
There are quite a few. There are quite a few. Things are different in Israel than in any other place in the world. Let's begin with the closing of the deal. In Israel, the closing of the deal is at the signing of the contract, not at the end of the deal, like in other countries, where one may sign an MOU, put down 10%, and only at the end of the deal, when everything is checked and goes through, the remaining money is paid. In Israel, it's not that way. And the implication is that all issues must be investigated thoroughly before signing any document. Get that engineer inspection. Get the mortgage approval. If you're counting on a sea view property, make sure that your view will not be blocked in the future by another building. In other words, you can't leave room for surprises, because once a contract is signed, it'll be very difficult to get out of the deal without payment of high penalties. Another difference that I find is, as I mentioned before, in Israel, money will be paid directly to the seller from the beginning of the deal, providing, of course, that all the proper securities are granted and placed. In other countries, the seller doesn't see his money until titleship and keys are given to the purchaser. So there's a big difference here. And typically people will say, well, I don't understand. I'm signing a contract and I won't receive the key to my residence within 6 months from signing of contract, let's say. Do I give 80% perhaps of the sale price to the seller? Well, my answer is yes. In Israel, it works differently, because a typical payment schedule is 10 to 20% is put down at the time of signing of a contract. And at this point, after a certain security is granted, the money is given directly to the seller. In addition to another, I would say about 60%, again, based on the negotiation of the terms of the deals and the needs of the parties, but in a typical deal, maybe 20% of the sale price is left till the end of the deal to ensure granting of possession and titleship. Of course, every deal varies, but the seller there are situations where the seller will see 80% of the money. He will have that money, and that's why it's very important to make sure that there are securities placed to protect the buyer, that the seller just doesn't go off or other issues come up.
Is it common for people just to put the money in escrow with their lawyer until the deal is over?
No, it is not. Only the first payment can be held in escrow and is held in escrow until the security is placed of what we call a caveat note. In Hebrew, it's called a he'arat hazara. And that grants the purchaser priority over any other future, let's say, purchasers or any other future creditors, et cetera, et cetera. But once that he'arat hazara, the caveat note, is put into place, the seller is going to see money, of course, providing it subject to all the other checks that were performed, that there are no other issues.
Mm-hmm. Wow, okay. A lot of things involved. What other sort of expenses should a purchaser expect is going to show up once he decides to do a deal?
Well, first of all, the main issue is the purchase tax that should be checked. There's a difference between purchase of one property or more, so an exact calculation should be made. Of course, there are the deals of the fees of the professionals, such as real estate agents, commissions, and engineer and architect inspection fees, mortgage bank fees, legal fees. But one very important point to stress is foreign currency. In Israel, most deals are done in shekalim, and a purchaser from abroad is bringing in foreign currency to purchase a shekel property deal. So he needs to take into account the fluctuation of currencies. He needs to take into account bank commissions and the rate he's going to be getting for his foreign currency. And this issue should be investigated and taken into very carefully so that if need be, proper protection from the bank, and there are ways to protect oneself from this fluctuation of currency. In addition to these expenses that I mentioned, there are those registration fees and other expenses that could be hidden expenses. I can give you an example of a deal that I just did last night. Somebody purchased a property in an elevator. There is an elevator, and before the deal was done, we found out that the seller did not pay for the use of the elevator that was put in the building at a much later date. So he did not have the key to actually use that elevator. Here was an extra hidden expense that the attorney must investigate and find out before. So it's very important to find out and get a list of all the expenses and factor them into the budget. And all these are in addition to the sale price. I would say that one can factor between a 5 to 10%, but it should be precise.
Wow, a lot of steps. Judy Rinot, thank you very much for explaining this to me in the last few seconds. Could you just tell us how people could reach you if they'd like to learn more?
Well, they can contact me either through my email address, that's laurinell@netvision.net.il, or to call me directly at 9729-7440-110, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Judy Rinot, thank you very much for your time.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.